Prejudiced cop arrests FBI agent, but karma strikes back with unexpected revenge. James Mitchell was sitting at a table in a dark bar, surrounded by familiar faces that offered him no comfort. The smoke from cigarettes mingled with the smell of alcohol, while the conversations around him intensified, creating an atmosphere of tension. He observed his companions from a distance, their laughter and racist jargons echoing like remnants of a life he had chosen. With a glass of whiskey in hand, he swirled the liquid, lost in thoughts that took him back to a fateful day in his childhood. "James, are you with us? Or are you already thinking about leaving?" asked a burly member of the group, a man with scars that told stories of past fights. His voice jolted James back to reality, and he forced a smile, trying to mask the confusion that consumed him. "Of course I am. Just reflecting on what we need to do next," James replied, his voice strained. But the truth was he was remembering Marcus, his childhood best friend, and the scene that unfolded before his eyes years ago. The flashback played like a film in his mind. Marcus's anguished scream as he was beaten by the police, the brutality that he couldn't prevent. James recalled being paralyzed, hiding behind a car, feeling the weight of helplessness crush him. The look in Marcus's eyes, filled with pain and betrayal, was an image that haunted him to this day. "Hey, are you okay?" The burly man interrupted his thoughts, and James realized everyone was watching him expectantly. "Yeah, just thinking about how we can really make a difference," he said, forcing a tone of conviction. But inside him, doubt grew like a shadow, and he wondered if there was really any path to change. That night, after the meeting, James decided to visit Marcus's grave. The sky was overcast, and the cold breeze seemed to whisper memories of a past he wished to leave behind. He knelt before the headstone, the grass still fresh around it. "I'm sorry, Marcus," he whispered, his voice choked. "I couldn't do anything. I should have done something." He felt tears stinging his eyes as guilt wrapped around him like an invisible chain. But now, is there still time for me to change? James closed his eyes and remembered the days they played together, the plans for a future that would never come to be. He stood up, determination beginning to blossom in his heart, but the reality of his life pulled him back. Over the years, he had allowed himself to be swept down a dark path, committing minor crimes here and there, until the need for acceptance and the desire to belong pushed him deeper into the web of supremacy. He recalled when he met Rick, an influential member of the group, who welcomed him like a brother. "You need to show strength, James. Weakness is for the weak," Rick had told him in one of their first conversations, his words like poison that slowly infiltrated his mind. "Here, we are the voice of the truth. Society needs to know who we are and what we stand for." James remembered how those words seduced him, like a siren song that led him away from any thought of change. As James reflected on his decisions, he realized he was trapped in a snare he had helped to construct. The echoes of childhood, the pain, the guilt, and the quest for acceptance blended in his heart, and he wondered if he could ever break this cycle. He looked up at the sky, which was beginning to lighten, and made a silent promise. "I will find a way to change, for Marcus and for myself." Hope began to bloom, albeit timidly, amidst the darkness surrounding him. Olivia Carter sat at the kitchen table, the smell of fresh coffee filling the air, but her gaze was distant, lost in memories of a past that haunted her. In front of her lay a pile of photographs of her brother Dan, scattered across the wooden surface, capturing moments that seemed to belong to another life. He smiled in some, while in others, his expression was pure joy, vibrant and full of dreams. But there was one photo that held her captive, an image of an older Dan with marks of pain and disillusionment etched on his face. She bit her lip, anger rising within her. "I will get justice, Dan," she murmured, as if the declaration could transcend time and reach her brother. At that moment, the phone rang, interrupting her silent mourning. It was her superior, informing her that her team was being assigned to investigate allegations of corruption within the Olivia's heart raced. It was the opportunity she had been waiting for, a step closer to exposing the brutality that had taken her brother's life. "Understood. I'll be there soon," she said, determination evident in her voice. Olivia arrived at the office with adrenaline coursing through her veins. The room was filled with agents, some familiar, and others she hadn't yet had the chance to meet. The team leader stood up, his expression serious. "We need to be cautious. Corruption within our own police force is a delicate subject," he began, looking around at everyone present. "But we cannot stand by while injustices occur. Murmurs of agreement echoed through the room, but Olivia felt a weight in her heart. She remembered her mother's words, always worried about the dangers of the profession, and the pressure began to manifest. "I know I can be the voice for those who don't have one," she interrupted, standing up. "What happened to my brother cannot be in vain." All eyes turned to her and a heavy silence settled in the room. One of the more experienced agents, a gray-haired man, regarded her with respect. "You're right, Olivia, but we need concrete evidence before we act." "I can help with that," she replied, her heart pounding with a new sense of purpose. After the meeting, Olivia returned home, her spirit determined, but the emotional weight of the day still following her. Upon entering the living room, she found her mother sitting on the couch, worry etched on her face. "Olivia, you know this could be dangerous, right?" her mother said, her voice trembling. "I just want you to be safe." "Mom, I need to do this," Olivia replied, trying to hide the vulnerability in her voice. "It's the only way to honor Dan's memory." "But what if something happens to you?" her mother pressed, concern evident in her gaze. Olivia sighed and sat down beside her, taking her hands. "I promise I'll be careful," she said, looking into her mother's eyes. "I won't let fear stop me from fighting for the truth." Days passed, and Olivia immersed herself in the investigation, but the shadow of doubt still loomed over her. With each new piece of evidence she uncovered, the weight of corruption within the police became more evident, and the thought of confronting her colleagues frightened her. In a moment of reflection, she lay on her bed, staring at the ceiling. She thought of Dan, his fight for justice, and how he always encouraged her to be strong. A sudden impulse made her get up and go to her desk, where she had kept a photo of her brother. "I will make it, Dan," she whispered, holding the picture against her heart. Determined not to let the pressure shake her, Olivia dedicated herself to building a solid case. She knew the truth needed to be revealed, not only to honor her brother, but to protect those who were still victims of brutality. And so, with each step she took, Olivia became not just an FBI agent, but a true defender of justice, willing to face any obstacle that arose in her path. James sat at a dark and dimly lit table, surrounded by familiar faces that now seemed strange and threatening. The smell of cigarettes and alcohol hung in the air, mingling with a palpable tension. The leader of the Supremacy Group, a burly man with tattoos snaking down his arms, looked around before speaking, his voice low but authoritative. "We need to act. The police are closing in. We can't let them interfere with our plans." He leaned forward, his eyes fixed on James. "Are you ready to do what's necessary?" James felt a chill in his stomach. The leader's words echoed in his mind, reminding him of the fragility of his position. He always wanted to be respected, but at what cost? "What do you mean by what's necessary?" He tried to keep his voice steady, but a subtle tremor betrayed his uncertainty. "We're going to destabilize that minority community," the leader replied, while the other members nodded, cruel smiles on their lips. "We'll show them who really runs this city." James looked around at the faces around him, hoping to see a glimmer of doubt, but everyone seemed so certain, so determined. He remembered Marcus and how police brutality had shaped his fate. The weight of guilt began to accumulate in his chest. What if we just stopped? What we're doing isn't right." The room fell silent. All eyes turned to him, and James felt his heart race. "Right? Do you think there's room for morality here?" The leader shot back, anger bubbling in his voice. "You need to choose a side, James. Don't be weak." "I'm not weak," James retorted, but the uncertainty in his voice betrayed him again. He abruptly stood up, the chair scraping against the floor. "I'll think about it." He walked out of the room, the cool night air hitting his face. The cold breeze couldn't extinguish the flame of conflict. James wandered the empty streets, his mind racing. He remembered Olivia, the FBI agent determined to expose the corruption. What would she think of him if she knew about his connections? There was something about her that drew him in, a desire to escape that dirty life and find a different path. Meanwhile, Olivia was in her office, reviewing documents that had come into her hands. The connection between the Supremacy Network and drug trafficking was stronger than she had imagined. She frowned, typing frantically on her computer. "If I can piece all this together, I can expose the truth," she murmured to herself, determined. A colleague entered, crossing his arms. "Do you really think you can pull this off? They have connections everywhere." "I can't just sit here while they keep doing this," Olivia replied, lifting her head. "We need to act before it's too late." "Be careful, Olivia. This could cost you your life," he warned. But her determination didn't waver. The next day, James found himself alone in a cafe, stirring the cold coffee he had forgotten. His phone vibrated and he hesitated before answering. It was a member of the network. "James, we need you. The meeting is tonight. Will you be there?" I don't know," he replied, his voice trembling. "I'm starting to question all of this. Don't be a coward. If you don't come back, you'll be left behind." The voice on the other end was cold and threatening. James hung up, the reality of what he was living weighing down on his shoulders. He looked out the window, watching ordinary people pass by, unaware of the horrors he was about to face. The image of Olivia appeared in his mind. What would she think if she knew he was about to join a violent action against those still fighting for justice? The moral dilemma consumed him. He wanted to do the right thing, but the pressure from the network pulled him away from his conscience. James took a deep breath, deciding he needed time to think. The future seemed uncertain, and he was about to make a choice that could change everything. The city was in turmoil. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, while the echo of protests resonated through the streets. Olivia Carter, with adrenaline pumping through her veins, watched the scene from a central square, where a crowd had gathered against police brutality. The heat of collective passion was palpable, and the determination in their eyes reflected the fight for justice that had become her life's purpose. "Olivia," a familiar voice called her, and she turned to see her friend and colleague, Sarah, approaching with a camera. "Are you ready for this? The media is covering everything." "It's now or never." "I'm ready, Sarah," Olivia replied, a bright spark in her eyes. "We need to show the world what's really happening here." Sarah adjusted the camera lens, capturing the moment. "The pressure is mounting. The report we did caused a stir, but now we need to ensure the message reaches those who can make a difference." Olivia nodded, her heart racing. "Yes, and that includes showing that we're not alone. Today, we are the voice of all those who have suffered unjustly." As she spoke, she remembered her brother's face, his eyes watching her from afar as if they knew the fight she was waging. The pain of loss was still present, but it was a pain that propelled her forward. The crowd gathered, holding signs and shouting slogans. Among them, the faces were a blend of anger, sadness, and hope. Olivia took a deep breath, feeling the energy of the moment. "Did you see the latest news about the link between the Supremacy Network and drug trafficking?" Sarah asked while searching for a good position to film. If this leaks, it could be the end of everything," Olivia interrupted, her gaze hardening. "That's why we need to be careful. They are closer than we think." The tension in her voice did not go unnoticed. Meanwhile, in a distant place, James Mitchell watched his heart tighten from afar, at the sight of Olivia's determination. He knew his choices had led him down a dark path, but her fight made him question his beliefs and loyalties. He wanted to approach her, but the fear of what might happen kept him rooted in place. "Are you just going to stand there and watch, James?" The voice of one of the members of the supremacist network pulled him from his thoughts. It was Brian, the leader of the group, with a challenging look in his eyes. "We need you out there. They're ready to act, and you could be the key to getting what we want." "And what if I don't want to be part of this anymore?" James replied, his voice low but firm. "What we're doing is wrong." Brian smiled, but there was a threatening glint in his eyes. "Wrong? Or just unpopular? The truth is, we need to show our strength. And you, my friend, are our link to what's happening out there." James felt a chill run down his spine. What he was about to do could mean his condemnation, but the thought of hurting Olivia and the other protesters was unbearable. He turned away, determined not to be swayed by those words. "I'm not one of them anymore. I can't." Meanwhile, the protest intensified. Olivia took the lead, raising a megaphone. "We're not here just for ourselves, but for everyone who has been silenced. Police brutality must end." The crowd responded with shouts of support, the sound echoing through the square. "Olivia," shouted Sarah, capturing everything on camera. "You're amazing. People need to hear this." But Olivia felt the pressure mounting. What would happen if the situation got out of control? What if the truth she sought to expose turned into violence? She needed to stay calm, but uncertainty loomed at every corner. James watched the scene, wrestling with his internal demons. He knew that if he didn't intervene, it might be too late. The choice lay before him, a fork in the road that could define his fate. He needed to act, but the question echoing in his mind was, how far was he willing to go to protect those who sought justice? The square was alive with energy, the sound of shouts and protests reverberating off the surrounding buildings. James Mitchell slipped through the crowd, his heart racing as his mind wrestled with the confusion of feelings consuming him. He wasn't there to protest. His presence was a secret mission. The supremacist network to which he belonged was keeping a close eye on any moves that could threaten their interests, and he had been assigned to monitor the situation. Yet the vibrant atmosphere and the determination of the protesters unsettled him. Olivia Carter was at the center of it all, her gaze fierce as she spoke to a group of people, igniting them with words that echoed her own pain. He watched her from a distance, admiring her courage. "Here we are fighting for what is right," she exclaimed, raising her fist. "We will no longer stay silent in the face of brutality. What we want is justice." James felt a pang in his chest, remembering his childhood and the helplessness he felt watching his friend Marcus being assaulted. He wondered if he was truly on the right path. What was he doing there? How could he align himself with people fighting against oppression while he himself was part of the problem? He stepped back a little, seeking a more isolated corner when a familiar figure appeared before him. James. The voice was familiar, but he hesitated. It was Olivia, her expression shifting from surprise to confusion. "What are you doing here?" He hesitated, knowing he couldn't reveal his true identity. I'm just observing," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "I think everyone has the right to express themselves. But you don't seem to be on their side," Olivia replied, her voice laden with suspicion. "You are one of them, aren't you?" The accusation hung in the air, and James felt the weight of her words. He could easily identify as a network member, but what would that mean for him? He stepped back even further, but Olivia didn't seem willing to let him slip away. "You need to understand what's at stake here," she continued, now closer. "People are dying. My brother died. I can't stay silent. I can't be quiet while this happens." Her voice trembled, and James realized the passion that drove her. "I don't know if this will change anything," he said, his voice low. "The struggle is hard, and people like us, we have a past. And if we don't try, who will?" Olivia insisted, her determination shining through. "You can be part of the change, James. You can make a difference." Her words hit him like lightning. He found himself in a dilemma. The connection he felt with her was real, and the idea of changing his life terrified him, yet it also drew him in. "I don't know if I'm capable," he murmured, looking down at the ground. "I'm so far from who I want to be." "We all have a past, James. What matters is what we do now. You have the chance to join us, to do something good," she said, her voice soft yet firm. "Don't let fear hold you back." James felt a wave of tumultuous emotions. He wanted to believe her words, but doubt consumed him. I need to go," he said, pulling away quickly. The desperation in her voice almost made him stop, but the need to escape his own demons pushed him forward. Olivia followed him with her gaze, a mix of concern and frustration on her face. "James, wait!" But he moved away, feeling threatened by the intensity of the situation. The struggle between who he was and who he wanted to be was more alive than ever, and he needed time to process it all. As James walked away from the square, adrenaline coursing through his veins, he knew that the decision he would make from that point could change the course of his life. Olivia's presence had challenged him, and the fight for justice she represented now resonated in his heart. But for now, he still wasn't ready to confront his choices. The past still haunted him, and the journey of redemption seemed further away than ever. James sat in an uncomfortable chair in the office of his old friend Sarah. The environment was cozy, with walls painted a soft shade of blue and shelves filled with books on psychology and self-help. The smell of fresh coffee lingered in the air, mingled with a faint scent of incense. He gazed out the window as the rain fell, each drop seeming to reflect his internal worries. The struggle between who he had always been and who he wanted to become consumed him. "James, are you still with me?" Sarah asked, pulling him from his thoughts. Her voice was soft yet firm. James knew she respected him, but she was also determined to help him face his demons. "I'm sorry, I was just thinking about some things," he replied, avoiding her gaze. "Sometimes I feel like I'll never be free from the past." "That's understandable," Sarah said, encouraging him to open up. "But you need to confront what happened. You can't just hide away." He took a deep breath, guilt choking him. "I remember the day Marcus was attacked. I felt so powerless. I should have done something. Now I'm trapped in this web of hate and I don't know how to escape." "You've already taken the first step by being here," she replied, offering an encouraging smile. "What do you really want, James? What do you desire for your future?" "I want to change. I want to do the right thing, but I feel like I'm tangled in something I can't break free from," he confessed, his voice cracking. Meanwhile, Olivia sat at her desk, surrounded by documents and photos revealing the corruption that was rotting the local police force. The determination coursed through her veins stronger each day, fueled by the memory of her brother. But as she investigated, her mind couldn't shake one thought: the network of supremacy behind many crimes. In a moment of clarity, she decided she needed more information. A contact within the police could be the key to exposing the corrupt. "What are you doing, Olivia?" asked a colleague, Daniel, who had entered the room unannounced. He watched her with a look of concern. "Do you really think you can take on this network by yourself?" "I'm not alone," she replied, her voice steady. "Besides, I can't just stand by while innocent people are being attacked. I have to do something. You know this could be dangerous." "They won't hesitate to silence you," Daniel warned, but Olivia was already resolute. "I'm willing to take that risk," she affirmed, looking him in the eye. "I can't let what happened to my brother happen to anyone else." In that moment, an anonymous call interrupted her thoughts. The number was unknown, but something inside her compelled her to answer. "Olivia Carter?" The voice was deep, with an urgent tone. "You need to know that the Supremacy Network is planning an attack during the event next week. They won't stop until they get what they want." Olivia felt her heart race. "Who's speaking? How do you know this?" "It doesn't matter. What matters is that you prepare. They have an infiltrator in the police. You need to be careful," the voice said before hanging up. She sat in silence, processing the gravity of the information. "Oh my God," she murmured, fear and determination swirling within her. It was the opportunity she needed, but it was also a threat. Meanwhile, James stood up from his chair, feeling a bit lighter. His conversation with Sarah had been difficult, but he knew he needed to continue this path. "I can't live in the shadows anymore, Sarah. I need to do something to change." "Then do it," she replied, her gaze piercing. "Change begins within you, but remember, it won't be easy. You'll have to confront your fears and past choices." "I understand," he said, resolute, "and I will do it. I can't let the past define who I am." Both of them, in their own worlds, were preparing to confront not only the corruption surrounding them, but also the inner demons that kept them trapped. James and Olivia were about to enter a game that would challenge their beliefs and force them to make choices that would change their lives forever. The day of the event arrived, and the city pulsed with tense energy. James Mitchell, now determined to prevent the violence his former Supremacy Network was planning, dressed discreetly and infiltrated the location once more. The event, a peaceful protest for civil rights, drew a crowd eager for change, but behind the scenes, the atmosphere was grim. He knew the network had its own plans, and the thought of a violent confrontation haunted him. As James moved through the crowd, his heart raced as he recognized some familiar faces. He kept his head down, trying to blend in, but the tension mounted with each passing moment. "I need to find Olivia before this all goes down," he thought, recalling her determination to expose the truth. He spotted a group of men in a corner, watching the protesters with threatening looks. That's where everything would begin. In a more secluded corner, Olivia Carter was in contact with her team, coordinating the final details of the protest. "We need to ensure the police are aware of our presence and that there are no provocations," she said, her voice firm and clear. "Any sign of violence could shift the focus from what we're really fighting for. We can't let them manipulate us." "Olivia, are you sure you're ready for this? What happened last time is still fresh in everyone's minds," one of her colleagues warned, concern evident in his tone. "I can't give up now. What we're doing is much bigger than me," she replied, her gaze determined. "This is our chance to show the truth. We need to be the voice for those who can't speak." Meanwhile, James, watching from a distance, felt torn. He knew he had to act, but the weight of his former loyalties pressed down on him. He approached one of the network members, a man named Blake, who greeted him with a nod. "James, you're here to help us, right? We have a plan that's going to shake the city," Blake said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, sure, just what exactly are you planning to do?" James asked, trying to maintain his composure. "We're going to teach these people a lesson. They need to understand they can't just go around saying whatever they please," Blake said with a glint of malice in his eyes. "If everything goes according to plan, the police will be on our side. You know how it works." James felt a knot in his throat. I don't know if that's the best approach, Blake. What if things get out of hand? Control? You still don't get it, James. Control is all we have," Blake replied, impatience seeping into his voice. With adrenaline coursing through his veins, James stepped away and began searching for Olivia in the crowd. He needed to warn her. When he finally spotted her, speaking with a group of protesters, his heart raced. He approached quickly but hesitated at the sight of the determination on her face. "Olivia," he called out, but her voice was muffled by the sound of screams and drums. She turned and their eyes met. "James?" The surprise and distrust were evident. "What are you doing here?" "We need to talk. It's important. The network. I can't stand by their sides involving violence," explained, panic starting to take hold. "You need to get out of here before it's too late. You can't just show up and expect me to trust you, James. What do you want? What do you really want?" Olivia questioned, her conflicting emotions clear in her voice. "I want to do the right thing. I can't let them hurt you or anyone else," James replied, sincerity shining in his eyes. At that moment, tension heightened as network members began to move toward the center of the crowd, whispering among themselves. James realized time was running out. "Olivia, they're getting ready to act. We need to alert the authorities." Olivia hesitated, but the urgency in James's voice made her consider the gravity of the situation. "I'll try, but you need to stay with me. I can't do this alone," she said. Looking at him with a mix of hope and fear, James agreed, and together they began to navigate through the crowd trying to reach an exit. But before they could act, a scream pierced the air and the tension exploded. Blake's plan was about to unfold, and the city, which dreamed of change, was on the brink of facing a new nightmare. The day of the event had finally arrived, and the atmosphere was charged with tension. A major protest was scheduled to take place in the city center, and James Mitchell, now determined to prevent the violence his former supremacist network was planning, infiltrated the crowd. He wore a dark jacket, his eyes alert as he scanned the unfamiliar faces around him. His heart raced not just from adrenaline, but from the urgency of his intentions. In the distance, he spotted Olivia Carter, who was among the crowd, her presence illuminated by the determination radiating from her. "That's a good thing," James thought as he moved carefully, trying not to draw attention. But at the same time, his mind was filled with doubts. What if the truth about his past was uncovered? What would happen to Olivia? On the stage set up for the protest, Olivia prepared to give a speech. She felt nervous, but the memory of her brother propelled her forward. "This is our chance to make a difference," she whispered to herself as she looked out at the growing crowd. The energy was palpable, and she felt part of something bigger than herself. "Olivia!" shouted one of her colleagues, interrupting her thoughts. "Are you ready? People are counting on you." "Yes, I'm ready," Olivia replied, though a chill ran down her spine. "But something doesn't feel right. I have a sense that tension is about to explode." Meanwhile, James approached a group of former allies chatting in a secluded corner. He overheard fragments of their conversation, and suddenly the word attack made him freeze. "They can't do this," he thought, the weight of his conscience pressing down on him. He edged closer, trying to grasp what was being plotted. "We need to show them who's really in charge," said one of the members, a burly man with a menacing look. "It's time to act. Chaos will give us control." James couldn't take it anymore. He turned to walk away, but his heart raced as Olivia spotted him. "Hey, you, wait," she called, her tone firm. James hesitated, his instincts screaming for him to flee, but something held him back. He stopped, and their gazes locked. For a moment, the world around them faded away. "James?" Olivia asked, surprised. "What are you doing here?" I'm just observing that something might happen here today." His voice trembling. "It's not safe. I don't want to get involved with this." Her tone now more urgent. "Why are you with them? I'm no longer part of this. I'm trying to change," he said, battling with his emotions. "But I don't know if I can. The pressure is immense." At that moment, a scream echoed from the crowd. James and Olivia turned to see a group of men approaching, all dressed to blend in with the protesters, but their eyes were cold and determined. James realized the situation was about to turn chaotic. "Olivia, you need to move away now. They're planning something violent," James shouted, adrenaline coursing through his veins. "I'm not leaving you here alone," she replied, her determination unwavering. "We need to alert the police. They can stop this before it starts." "No, they won't believe you. And if they recognize me, you'll be in danger too." James exploded, the tension escalating between them. He knew that if he continued to speak the truth, their lives would be at risk. "I'm not stepping away from you again, James. We're stronger together. Let's do this," Olivia said, and the courage in her eyes inspired one last flicker of hope in his heart. The crack of a smoke bomb interrupted their conversation, and chaos erupted in the crowd. James turned to Olivia, resolved to protect the only person who truly mattered now. "Let's put an end to this," he said, taking her hand. Let's expose this network before it's too late. United by a common purpose, they sprang into action, ready to challenge whatever came next. James felt that for the first time he was fighting not just for himself, but for something greater, justice. And with Olivia by his side, he felt stronger than ever. After the action that dismantled the supremacist network, the city breathed a mix of relief and tension. James Mitchell, now handcuffed and surrounded by officers, felt the weight of his choices. He had opposed violence, but the freedom he sought seemed distant, like a mirage in a desert of regrets. As he was led away to the station, his mind wandered between the past and the present, remembering Marcus, his childhood, and the winding path that led him to this moment. While James was being escorted, Olivia Carter stood in a corner of the police station watching the scene with a mix of victory and pain. She recognized the sacrifice James had made and how it had turned him into a symbol of hope. "He's not the same man who entered that network, is he?" one of her colleagues whispered, looking at James. "He's become someone better, even if it's behind bars," Olivia replied, her voice filled with unwavering determination. "Rescue." He opposed what he believed was right. That is courage. The following weeks were intense. James awaited his trial, surrounded by a hostile environment, but also by a new light beginning to shine in his life. He spent hours reflecting in his cell, trying to understand the new identity he had forged. One day, while watching the sunlight stream through the window, a guard approached. "You're one of the few who has earned respect here. What you did was talking about you, James. Different," the guard said with a look of admiration. James smiled faintly. The idea of being respected felt strange yet comforting. "Everyone deserves a second chance, right? Even me," he replied, his voice heavy with emotion. Outside, Olivia was relentless. She had become an active voice in the fight against police brutality, participating in protests and giving speeches, always honoring her brother's memory. He had the courage to stand up against a system that imprisoned him. In a live interview, she declared, "And now we all must rise to ensure that this never happens again." Her words echoed across social media, and public support grew rapidly. The day of the trial arrived, and the courtroom was packed. Olivia, sitting among the spectators, felt her heart race. She not only supported James, but represented all the voices that had been silenced. When the prosecution began to present its evidence, she paid close attention to every detail, knowing that true justice was at stake. "Olivia, do you still believe he can be acquitted?" a friend asked as they waited for the judge to enter. "Yes. He opposed violence, and for that he should be seen as a hero, not a villain," she replied with conviction. As the trial progressed, an unexpected twist emerged. A video was presented as evidence, revealing the tampering of evidence by an undercover agent. The room fell into absolute silence, and Olivia felt a wave of hope wash over her. This could change everything, she murmured to herself as she watched the jury's reaction. When the judge delivered his final statement, the atmosphere in the courtroom was electrically tense. "The court finds the defendant not guilty of the charges of conspiracy and violence. The truth has been revealed, and James Mitchell, you are a symbol of redemption," the judge announced, and a murmur of disbelief swept through the room. With tears in his eyes, James looked at Olivia, who returned his gaze filled with support. "You did it, James. You did what was right," she exclaimed, as people around them began to applaud, a wave of support echoing the struggle they had faced together. As James left the courthouse, the crowd cheered, and he realized that despite everything, a future lay ahead. Olivia, now a respected advocate for human rights, approached him. "Let's rebuild this together," she said, smiling. And in that moment, despite the scars of the past, a new chapter opened for both of them, filled with hope and determination. The courtroom was silent as the recording was presented as evidence. The atmosphere was tense, showed one of the members of the supremacist network dominating the room. Mark Thompson, disguised as a police officer, coordinating violent actions against protesters. The shocking images left the audience in disbelief. The brutality that had been hidden was now revealed before them. James Mitchell, sitting in the defendant's chair, felt his heart race as the truth emerged from the shadows. "Mr. Thompson, are you aware that your actions were being recorded?" the defense attorney asked, visibly nervous, his voice echoing. I didn't know this was happening. I was just following orders." "Orders from whom?" the prosecutor demanded, her voice firm. "You were operating outside the law, acting with total impunity, using your position to destabilize the peace." The recording continued and the evidence became increasingly undeniable. James glanced at Olivia, who watched the scene with a mix of anxiety and hope. She remembered the determination that had brought her to this point, the pain that had motivated her to fight. Now, the truth was about to prevail. The judge, with a stern expression, looked at the accused and said, "The court will not tolerate corruption within the ranks of the police. Citizens deserve protection, not oppression." With the revelation of the recording, the mood in the courtroom shifted. The confidence that had once seemed to be with the accusers began to dissipate. The voices of the protesters and victims of police brutality echoed in the minds of everyone present, and indignation began to transform into solidarity. After the recording was shown, the judge called for a recess. James and Olivia met in the courthouse corridors. Olivia's look was intense, as if she wanted to absorb every detail of what was about to happen. "James, this could change everything. You could be acquitted," she exclaimed, emotion spilling over in her voice. He sighed, relieved but still apprehensive. What if it's not enough? What if they try to cover this up? I can't go back to being the man I was. Olivia placed her hand on his shoulder, conveying strength and encouragement. "You've already changed, James. And now you have the chance to be the voice you've always wanted to hear. Not just for you, but for everyone who has suffered. This is your moment of redemption." The trial continued. Witnesses began to be called, and several corrupt officers were confronted with the evidence. Each of them, upon seeing the gravity of the charges, began to distance themselves from the narrative they had upheld for so long. The atmosphere of tension transformed into a wave of hope as testimonies piled up. Finally, after hours of deliberation, the judge addressed the courtroom. After careful analysis of the evidence presented, this court concludes that James Mitchell is not guilty of the charge. A murmur swept through the room. Furthermore, the gravity of Mr. Thompson's actions and those of other members of his corruption network necessitates a thorough investigation. James felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He looked at Olivia, who was now in tears. "We did it, James. You're free." After the trial, the two met at a nearby cafe, the aroma of fresh coffee filling the air as they discussed the future. "What will you do now?" Olivia asked, "I want to become a civil rights advocate, help others rise up. I can't change what I did, but I can fight so that no one else goes through what I went through," James replied, his voice firm and full of determination. Olivia smiled, admiring the transformation that had occurred in him. "You're not alone. We'll do this together. You're already a symbol of hope, and now, more than ever, we need voices like yours." "And you, Olivia? What will you do next?" James asked, intrigued. "I will continue fighting against police brutality and corruption. The struggle doesn't end here, and I want you by my side. Together we can bring about meaningful change," Olivia declared, her eyes shining with passion. As they talked, the promise of a better future settled between them, a new alliance forged in the fight for justice. They knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but together, they were ready to face any challenge that came their way.